All right, guys. Get in here.
Welcome to Wildland Fire.
This is where you got to go to failure. If you try to test yourself out in the real world, you're failing here, you will fail in real life.
This is the hardest job in the world.
People were watching each other die as they were passing their brother and sister.
Panic sets, chaos hits, and take charge and take care of the rest of the guys.
Overarching thing that we do here is try to bring order to chaos.
We'll do it live. Okay.
No.
We'll do it live. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. Thing sucks.
All right. Let's get in here, people.
How can a modern water system properly designed to meet emergency fire conditions fail to function? Let's look at this simplified diagram of houses on a hill being supplied by a water tank above. When thousands of outlets are opened below the hill, water pressure is lost in the overtaxed main, regardless of the amount of water above the houses. Where the water supply comes from a distant location and supply pipes dead end on the hill, unnecessary use of too many outlets below the fire area simply drains the water out of the upper system. We have considered water, wind, and weather. Now there's the very real problem of how a house is constructed and where. Suppose we live in a house above the congestion of the neighborhood below, or in a stilt house built over the brush, or in a typical home with a combustible roof, wide low eaves to catch sparks and fire, and a big picture window to let the fire inside. Under any such conditions, there's not much of a chance.
All right, everybody. For those of you who saw my last live stream, we played this section of a 1962 Los Angeles Fire Department documentary. And to me, it's very striking because if we were to just overlay footage from the Palisades today, under that voiceover, it would be exactly the same. And it just shows that we seem to have not learned any of the lessons that we needed to learn in the last 6 decades. So we have a big, massive development with the Palisades fire. These days, it sort of feels like everyone's black-pilled, right? No one's ever held accountable. Nothing ever happens. The good guys never do anything. There are no good guys. Well, I'm here to give you a nice white pill. There are some good guys out there. One of those good guys, Trey, Mr. Robertson. Today, some information that I'd been privy to for some time and respectfully embargoed because it's really important to let the system of justice play out properly. Today, victims of the deadly Palisades fire filed an amended complaint in the lead case for the Palisades fire litigation, which alleges new evidence, including why the Santa Ynez Reservoir was empty on the day of the Palisades fire, how the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power had energized power lines that started multiple fires on January 7th, how the city ignored its own brush clearance on city-owned vacant lots, which contributed to the rapid spread of the fire, and how the city tried to cover up its responsibility for causing the worst urban conflagration in the city's history. There are good guys out there. So Alexander Robertson, I know him from actually being on some fires. I've seen him out there. He understands wildfire about as well as anybody could because of both firsthand experience, but also representing victims of government and utility neglect on multiple fires. So today they filed in court an amended complaint naming the city, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, for negligence as it pertains to the Palisades fire. And we are going to get into all of the issues, but basically what we have to ask ourselves is, why was that reservoir empty? How long was it empty? Did they have any backups? We've focused a lot on the water issue. I think today is going to crystallize what the real problem was, maybe more than anything else, because this is brand new information. What started the fire, right? We've talked about a rekindle. We've focused on that area from the Lockman fire on New Year's Eve. What started this fire? What makes us believe that there was just one fire? That's the question. I apologize for my ish-eating grin, but to me, this is a really intriguing question. Why do we believe there was only one ignition? Were there multiple ignitions? I think we're about to find out. So let's just get right into it. For background here, you've heard me talk about Topanga State Park. I told you about how when I was on the 2021 Palisades fire, I got really, really spooked out because I saw just how bad the vegetation was, how poorly managed this state park is. Now, you hear the governor of California, he's been on a rampage talking about federal lands. Like every opportunity he can, he's talking about, oh, this fire started on federal lands and the feds need to get their act together. Look, I can't hate on it entirely because he is right. The feds do need to get their act together. But he's not telling you the full story in that local agencies, state agencies in California actually preclude the feds and other agencies within the state from doing this work. It's absolutely maddening to watch this. Did you know that a lot of agencies, they are restricted to only doing 30 acres of prescribed fire in a single day because of the state? The state environmental agencies, local environmental agencies are restricting this. So it's like they're handcuffing the feds, they're handcuffing, San Bernardino County, and then complaining that the work's not getting done. It's so disingenuous and it's so frustrating. But when you look at Topanga State Park, anyone can just look at it and see what a rat's nest it is. On the Palisades fire in 2021, when I went up to the edge of the park where the fire was burning and I saw what a rat's nest it was, this old couple, they drove up, they were locals. They said, we've lived here 40 years and we have not seen fire move through here. They understood how dire that was because they understand, a lot of people, the longer you go without a fire, they get lulled into this false sense of security, like, oh, fires just don't happen here. The problem is every year that goes by that you don't have a fire, your risk increases, and it increases exponentially because not only do you have more fuel on the ground, but because you have more fuel on the ground, they're all competing for these resources. So they get exponentially more dry and more receptive to fire. So it's not like this linear line where every year your fire threat goes up. It's more like a logarithmic curve, and it becomes exponential. So one of the best parts about this lawsuit, this amended complaint that was filed today, they discuss the history of the California state parks, right? And the plaintiffs who they're representing, they believe that despite the California State Park's knowledge of the history of destructive wildfires in Topanga State Park, and that dense flammable vegetation had built up for over 47 plus years in the area where the January 7th Palisades fire is suspected to have originated, California state parks refused to create fuel modification zones in Topanga State Park. Did you hear that, Governor Newsom? Topanga State Park, the most expensive fire, the most expensive disaster in the history of humanity, started in Topanga State Park. In fact, the suit goes on to say, California State Parks Operations Manual states that it is the department's policy to prohibit the construction and maintenance of fire breaks, fuel breaks, and other fuel modification zones on department lands, except when required by state law to clear around structures or facilities, previous legal commitments that have been made to allow the creation and maintenance of fuel modification areas. C, it is critical to the protection of life or park resources, or D, park vegetation 130 horizontal feet from a non-department habitable structure is capable of generating sufficient radiant convective heat when burning under red flag warning conditions to ignite the habitable structure. What does that mean? This means there is a mandate for them to clear vegetation with enough space. It says 130 horizontal feet from homes, a non-department habitable structure. Basically, they are required to create a safety zone between the state park's property and its brush and any inhabitable residence with enough space to be able to endure the convective radiant heat generated by a wildfire under red flag warning conditions. Does it look like they did that? Does it look like they did that? We went over some of that footage. Let me do a screen share real quick because I want to, let's do this. We're going to look again at this area where it started and see if you guys think that they did enough. Let's go to where the general origin area of the fire was. And we're going to go into street view here. And let's see, is this showing? Absolutely. Look at that. Look at this. Does this look well maintained to you at all? Does this look like they cleared out enough brush around these power lines? Does it look like they're ready for a red flag day? Well, obviously we know the answer to that because the answer is no. This is state property. This is where the fire started. Now, they're a lot more careful because this is legal action, but we know that it started on state property. Now, going back to what may have ignited the Palisades fire, we've got two layers here, right? So it is widely believed, and there is evidence, that this was a rekindle from the Lockman fire. And so here we are, we're watching, the nighttime shot is the Lockman fire from New Year's Eve, where something, and it may have been fireworks, allegedly, that is sort of the prevailing theory, started an 8-acre fire that they put out. Here's the problem. The Palisades fire started right in the footprint, just outside the footprint of the Lockman fire. And if you recall in our last live stream, we covered radio traffic where Helco, Fire 4, the city fire helicopter, overhead was reporting that the fire started just below the burn scar from New Year's Eve. Then Engine 69s, a few minutes later, when asked, hey, where did this fire start? He said, oh, it started real close to that fire that we had on New Year's Eve. So just because it started close, I mean, and by close, I mean like immediately adjacent to that burn scar, does that mean that it was a rekindle? It doesn't automatically. We need more evidence. Well, we have more evidence. So apparently, it is believed, according to this amended complaint, it's believed that the Los Angeles Fire Department did not post a fire watch or use a thermal imager at the Lockman fire after the reported containment of the fire to ensure that there were no embers, hotspots, or residual heat remaining in the vegetation. This is damning. Now, we discussed this before, just in case you know or don't know, when it comes to containing a fire, it doesn't mean putting the fire out. That's just part of it, right? That's stopping the spread of the fire. You need to cut a physical line around that fire to separate it from unburned fuel. And then you need to mop up and remove all of the heat from the fire, right? You have to cool it down. And mop up is this really annoying process where you kind of have to dig in there with hoses. You're making soup of the soil. You're trying to get that water to permeate deep into the soil, because with a lot of this chaparral, this dense vegetation, the root ball is burning and continuing to smolder even after the fire is out. And it's something like that where you can be very vulnerable. What happens as these root balls are burning, imagine that void that's created as that burns up, right? This is why you see a lot of rock slides on fires like this, because the soil is sort of being filled by these roots. As they burn up, it will crack, rocks and dirt will fall away. This exposes a burning root ball, okay? So this is why you need to make sure that as you're mopping up, you're trying to get water deep under the surface. You can't just spray some foam on the top. You have to mix it in there. When you're watching good mop up, you're seeing guys with tools trying to scrape and mix this water in. It's like, you know, mixing up brownie batter. Apparently, it is alleged that they did not do sufficient mop up based on the protocols, that just a few hours afterwards, they didn't have a lookout. Below, let me maximize this for you. Below are photographs taken on January 2nd at 8:07 a.m. Now this fire, this went off like New Year's Eve, I think around midnight. It took them a few hours. So 8:07 in the morning, it's not that long after this fire was put out. Now, keep in mind, at this point in January, they still haven't had any season-ending rains, which is highly uncommon, right? So normally in Southern California, by the second week of November, you are getting season-ending precipitation, meaning you're getting about 2 inches of rain, and that's putting a damper on the probability of ignition. At 8:07 a.m., of the Lackawanna Fire burn scar area, taken by a hiker, which shows, apparently, that no firefighters remained on scene 4 hours after the fire was declared fully contained. Now, remember what we said, what's required in order for it to be contained? It's got to be cold. They're alleging that they didn't use a thermal imager to determine whether or not it was actually cold. That's not good. That's not good. It's one thing if you get a rekindle. It's another thing if you get a rekindle because you didn't follow protocol, right? It's just like getting into an accident in your car. If you're not texting while you're driving and you get hit, you're good. But if you weren't following protocol and then you get hit, can you really say that you're not at fault? That's why you have to follow protocol. What are the consequences of that? I don't know. Look at this. This was shot later that same morning. Now, you don't have to be a fire scientist to see what's going on here. There's still heat. It's like you don't need a thermal imager. There's still heat. Now, in the previous live stream that I did, I showed a video by this same guy, and it wasn't a full 360-degree video, but to me, I didn't see anybody up there. And I put in the caveat that perhaps somebody was further down the path. Perhaps they just went to go get lunch, or there was a shift change. We don't know. But they're alleging that there was no fire patrol to ensure that this thing was dead out. And you can see that this picture taken below the Temescal Ridge Trail early in the morning on January 1st, 2025, which depicts smoldering within the burn scar of the Lackawanna Fire. So this is why they believe this was a rekindle, right? Now, we're going back to Brandy's live stream. This is Fire Photo Girl. I put that watermark on there. Why? Because there is a habit of a lot of people to just take other people's work. Brandy goes in there, she risks her life, her health. She's going to die young because of all the smoke that she breathes in, just like all the other great fire photographers who we have who do it right. you got to give them credit for when they do this stuff. You can't just take their videos and then, bury their credit like below the fold on the tweet. You got to make sure that we are promoting each other, especially when someone is risking their life to get this imagery that is so valuable. Now, the reason why this is valuable talks about the resources that should have been there. There's been a lot of controversy about this. A lot of people are asking, why didn't they pre-position resources in the neighborhood on this red flag day? Now, everybody knew this was going to be a bad day. Everybody. Like Rich Thompson, he's a great follow on Twitter, by the way. He is an incident meteorologist. I can't tell you how many of his incident forecasts I read in my time on the fire line that kept me alive because I knew what to expect. He was, I don't want to say histrionic, but he was very stern in his warnings leading up to this day in January 7th, that this was going to be a particularly dangerous situation. And everybody knew it was going to be bad. Everybody knew it was going to be bad, potentially, right? So according to Gavin Newsom, he said, quote, "There's a reason we pre-positioned hundreds of assets and personnel on Sunday in anticipation of this wind event. 110 engines specifically were sent down, 45 CAL FIRE, 65 through our mutual aid system through the Office of Emergency Services, water tenders down here, 7 new helicopters we brought from Northern California down to Southern California." Makes him look good, right? He pre-poed all these resources, 110 engines, 7 new helicopters. What do you notice about this live stream with Brandy? Look how close the fire is. What do you notice as she's driving up to where we see the flaming front? Do you see any engines? I don't see anything. Let's fast forward like another 7-8 minutes. That's not a firefighter. That's a fire photographer. You see anybody? Dude, she's in there squirting down with a garden hose. She's squirting down somebody's ornamental vegetation that's starting to take off. There's nobody here. Where were they? So this amended complaint that was filed today by the great Alexander Robertson, Trey, states that none of those firefighting assets mentioned by the governor were pre-deployed to the Pacific Palisades, a wildfire-prone area and the site of the Lockman fire just 6 days earlier. Now, that is the key point. One of the issues with pre-deploying resources and everybody holding the screws to like, why weren't they pre-deployed here? Brother, look at Southern California. There's fire potential everywhere. How do you decide where to pre-deploy? You only have so many resources, right? So it's like, where do you put them? Should they be in Santa Clarita? Should they be in Sylmar? Where do you put all these people? How do you decide and triage which areas should be prioritized? Well, this is the key point. The Lockman fire just 6 days earlier, they had an 8-acre fire above this area. And just outside the burn scar of the Lockman fire, it is super dense vegetation. You would think that any reasonable person would prioritize the Palisades for the potential of a rekindle. At the very least, if we don't know what caused the Lockman fire, maybe it was a wizard. Maybe it was something that's still a present threat out there. They didn't detain anybody. They didn't catch anybody for that fire. So if that was caused by a person, chances are they're still there, right? The Palisades fire in 2021, there was a wizard who started multiple small fires deep in the cut, and they couldn't even get to them, right? So they could only work it with helicopters. That guy was just going around one after another until the next day it took off in 55-degree weather, by the way, and 85% humidity. That's how bad Governor Newsom's Topanga State Park is. That even when you don't have fire weather, you can get an 1,100-acre fire outside of fire season with 85% humidity and 55-degree weather. That's how bad Topanga is, okay? They didn't have anybody up there. Look at these streets. There's nobody up there. So why didn't they pre-deploy to an area where they just had a fire? Now, let's go on to the water issues. To understand the way that this works, and you'll remember that that documentary that we showed at the beginning, this has been an ongoing issue since the 60s, at least, right? they're making a documentary about how the water system here fails. And we know that anytime there's an urban conflagration, as the homes burn, their plumbing gets severed. And so imagine like pricking a hose full of like nail holes. It's leaking like a sieve. You're going to lose so much at the other end. You're going to lose all that pressure. Okay, so this is something that happens. It happened in Ventura on the Thomas fire when I was on it. So look, it's not that out of the ordinary, but there's some new information here that's very damning for the LADWP. So let's get an understanding of what the Palisades water system looks like. LADWP's water supply to the Pacific Palisades is fed by a single outdated 36-inch trunk line along Sunset Boulevard, the Westgate trunk line, that flows by gravity from the Stone Canyon Reservoir located in Bel Air up to the San Ynez Reservoir and Palisades Reservoir on Chautauqua Boulevard. There, water is pumped uphill in 3 water storage tanks, each with a capacity of 1 million gallons of water. The tanks keep up water pressure to homes in Palisades Highlands and fire hydrants by gravity flow from the storage tanks. During the Palisades fire, the reservoirs, storage tanks, and the pump stations that supply them could not keep pace with the demand placed on the water supply, including the fire hydrants, and were a substantial cause of the uncontrolled spread of the Palisades fire. This is what this complaint alleges. On information and belief, the first storage tank, the Marquez Knolls tank, ran dry around 4:45 p.m. on Tuesday. So that's what, 6 hours after the initial attack began? The water level in the second tank, the trailer tank, began to plummet, and it ran dry around 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday, January 7th. And water levels in the third tank, the Temescal tank, began to drop around 6:30 p.m. and it ran dry around 3 a.m. on Wednesday, January 8th. Now, remember, look, the big show was on the 7th, but this fire continued to wreak havoc the following day and overnight. Now, according to this amended complaint that was filed today, the LADWP has admitted that 20% of the nearly 1,100 fire hydrants in the Palisades lost water pressure during the fire. Now, that's not as egregious as what everybody thinks happened, but dude, imagine crippling your fire hydrants by 20%. And this is just what they admitted. Keep that in mind as we go forward. The LADWP, this is going to be a tongue twister. I'm going to need to find a different acronym. The DWP issued a press release on January 23rd, 2025, titled Correcting Misinformation about LADWP's Water System, which claimed all LADWP pump stations remained operational during the fire and water supply remained strong to the area. However, during a Board of Water and Power Commissioner meeting on January 28th, LADWP's current Chief of Water Operations, Anselmo Collins, said there was not enough pressure in the pipes to provide what we call suction pressure for our pump to take that water, lift it to a higher elevation. But as pressure dropped because of the high demands, eventually those pumps were no longer able to pump water because the pressure was too low. The tanks that were full at the beginning were dropping. And while the pumps were still operational, the pumps could not keep up with the demand. There was more water leaving the tanks than we could physically put into the tanks because the demand was so great. Interesting reversal, huh? In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Collins admitted that the LADWP had a plan to shut off the water to adjacent neighborhoods such as Brentwood to increase the water pressure to the Pacific Palisades, but ultimately decided not to move forward with the plan. We had a plan, but we did not execute on the plan, Collins said. So it is believed that there was no other plan to rectify the lack of water pressure in the supply system, resulting in dry fire hydrants and empty water tanks. So they chose not to follow their contingency plan. Why? That's my question. This left firefighters and homeowners with virtually no water to fight the fire and destroying the Pacific Palisades community in inherent risk of draining the San Ynez Reservoir. The LADWP has recognized that the LADWP's reservoirs, storage tanks, and fire hydrants will be used for firefighting efforts during wildfires. LA Fire Department Captain Kevin Easton was part of a structure protection team assigned to protect homes in the Palisades Highlands on January 7th. After midnight, the fire hydrants that were being used to fight the fire ran dry. Completely dry, he said. Couldn't get any water out of it. Even on Wednesday afternoon, hours after the hydrants had gone dry, there was still no water. Houses in the Highlands burned, becoming part of more than 5,000 structures destroyed by the Palisades fire so far. By Thursday evening, Kristen M. Crowley, the chief of the LA Fire Department, said firefighters had stopped tapping into the hydrants altogether. Right now, we're not utilizing the hydrants, she said. Well, it gets worse. It gets worse than that. This suit alleges that the LADWP was aware of these pressure issues all the way back in August of 2024, and they did not remedy it. What? I'm going to say that again. This suit alleges that the LADWP was aware of these pressure issues all the way back in August of 2024, and they did not remedy it. Now, there was a portion in this segment that I just read that I want to reemphasize. It talks about the Palisades Highlands. Who remembers that area from our last live stream? After midnight, the fire hydrants that were being used to fight the fire ran dry. They couldn't get any water out of it. So the houses in the Highlands then burned, becoming part of more than 5,000 structures destroyed by the Palisades fire so far. This is weird. You know where the Highlands are? That's up at the origin of the fire. Now, I played you radio traffic from the first responding resources, and I was trying to play this to demonstrate to people, firefighters were there, right? People are alleging that LAFD screwed up. They had a slow response. They didn't. And I want to play you this clip that shows that Engine 23 was up there doing structured triage. They hadn't deployed for structure protection just yet. They were doing triage. Let's watch this one clip.
Truck 69, we're on Chastain at Calle Victoria. These houses look okay. Do we have a new destination?
Interesting. These houses look okay. So what they had done is they drove up to the origin of the fire, and they saw that these houses were okay. And the thing is, the fire is in alignment to go towards like Ridgeview and Pali High, like that area, because the winds are taking it towards the ocean, right? So the fire is kind of just skirting those homes. So my question is, this is odd, right? A wind-driven fire is going to be very directional. So this thing is going to blow south, maybe like have a slightly easterly aspect, and push to the west. But how is it that fires near the point of origin would burn later? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Especially because we know that hand crews got deployed up into this area towards the heel of the fire, because the goal of the wildfires, they're trying to secure the heel of the fire, right? That's the area where you want to try to cut off this back door of the fire, so you're only fighting it on this side, and you don't have to worry about it going this way, right? And then fight it on two fronts. So they had LA County, the inmate camp crews up there, cutting line around the heel of the fire. Crews are only going to be in there if fire activity is low enough that a human being can get up to it with a tool and do work, right? So it wasn't cranking up there. How in the heck did those fires those homes that were fine earlier, how did they end up burning later in the night? How did that happen? That should have been secured. Remember this, we're going to get to that, and it's not good. As far as it pertains to the water issues, I've talked about how sometimes the whole water thing is kind of overblown, just because when it's really cranking, water doesn't do a whole lot, but it makes a difference early on, right? So once the structure is like ripping, that water it vaporizes before it even hits the flames. And we've seen how that can happen, but it can make a difference early on, like we saw in Brandy's live stream, when that ornamental vegetation is just starting to go. If you just have a little bit of water, you can maybe stop it. But this requires people being everywhere, right? And being really quick. You got to be really quick and get on top of it right away, because once it starts to go, there's basically no stopping it, right? Here's where the real issue is, that empty reservoir. Not so much in the empty fire hydrants, and again, this is my opinion, this has nothing to do with the lawsuit. Like I said, I think that the main issue with water is getting stuff early. And the main issue with the reservoir wasn't so much about the fire hydrants going dry. because that seems to be a failure with the trunk line not being able to supply enough water, regardless of where it's coming from. It's just an outdated system, and they couldn't keep up with the demand, and they weren't prepared. And they didn't follow the contingency plan. But with the reservoir being empty, here's what it really impacts. Helicopters. That's a dip site. It's a dip site. They also have a landing site, which is called, it's a helispot, where you'll have an engine manning this area. You'll have a hydrant, and the ship will land. They'll plug in a hose, fill it back up, right? Some copters, like the LA County copters, are equipped with snorkels, so they can potentially just hover over a body of water. They can even hover over a pool, right? They could dip out of your pool. This reservoir, the Santa Ynez Reservoir, is empty. Now, if you look at this image, what you'll see is the red area. The red arrow is indicating the general area of origin of the fire, and that blue arrow is indicating the empty Santa Ynez Reservoir, which is a helispot, right, for firefighting. So this is from the complaint. The plaintiffs are also informed and believe that the LADWP's Santa Ynez Reservoir was drained and out of service during the Palisades fire, and that this failure was the result of LADWP's decision to forego proper and reasonable inspection, maintenance, and repair of the reservoir's floating cover as a cost savings decision. The disastrous result was the fire hydrants ran dry during the critical first 12 hours of the firefight, which was an inherent risk of LADWP's, quote, wait until it breaks maintenance policy. LADWP's decision to forego maintenance of the Santa Ynez Reservoir was a substantial factor in causing plaintiffs to suffer the losses, having been drained in April of 2024, awaiting repairs to its floating membrane cover. Now, if you recall in our last stream, when we were talking about the reservoir, we were saying, look, man, you got to fix it. Like, if it needs repair, you got to take it offline at some point. You would think that if it's offline in January, you're good. Dude, this was offline since April. It was offline for all of fire season. So it's not like they had picked, oh, this would be the best time to do it. They were just taking forever to get it fixed. And so that's why it was offline, not because they thought, oh, we're good in January. Dude, it was offline for the entire fire season, apparently. This is unbelievable. And they're alleging that this was just a lack of maintenance and inspection. Now, this is where the empty reservoir is a very serious problem early on in the firefight. So it's believed that the first water drop from an LAFD helicopter occurred around 10:40 a.m. Now, we documented that in our last live stream. 10:40 a.m., that's 10 minutes after the fire was toned out. So these guys were on it. Like I said, the response by LAFD was fine. They were already dropping water on this thing, like with 3 copters. By the time, I think we were like 18 minutes in, and the first drop apparently came 10 minutes in. So all these stories in the Washington Post where people were saying that they didn't even drop water, that's complete bullshit. So the first drop occurred around 10:40 a.m. on January 7th, and thereafter, helicopters were forced to fly to faraway helipads in Malibu and elsewhere to refill their water tanks before returning to the fire to drop their loads of water. As a result, plaintiffs alleged that aerial firefighting was unable to contain the spread of the fire. So look at this image again. You can see the proximity of the reservoir. You just got to fly over. As the crow flies, what is this, 1.5 miles across Palisades Drive or Sunset? That's not that far. And that's a very conveniently placed dip site. But because that reservoir was empty and the Santa Ynez helispot wasn't functional, they had to go all the way to the Laco helipad, 69 Bravo. And we heard this in the radio transmissions where they had initially changed the Santa Ynez helispot assignment to 69 Bravo. Look how much farther away that is. Do you see that? Look at the area of the fire and then the Santa Ynez helispot, and like 3 times farther away, you have 69 Bravo. That's where the copters were forced to go to just to load and return. What do you think that's doing to the flight time and the frequency of those water drops? Like, the goal when you've got your aerial assets over the fire is to smother that thing. You want like a conveyor belt of water. This is why super scoopers are so effective, because they come in one on top of another and they're just ripping laps without ever landing. They're just dropping into the ocean, drop, drop. It's like constant rain. And that's what you want, right? Because in between the drops, the fire will flare up and just rip again. okay? So the more you can have that conveyor belt running, the better your odds of tackling this. So going back to the complaint, the San Ynez Reservoir has a helipad with a fire hydrant dedicated for use by LAFD water-dropping helicopters to land and refill their water tanks in the event of a brush fire. I've seen this. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that LADWP has, quote, formal agreements with LAFD for use of this reservoir specifically for firefighting purposes. However, with the San Ynez Reservoir drained, the 117 million gallons of water supply, the hydrant at this helipad could not be utilized during the Palisades fire, forcing helicopters to fly miles away from the fire zone to refill their water tanks in Malibu, at LA County Fire Department's helipad 69 Bravo near Saddle Peak Road, and LA County Fire Department's Camp 8 at the top of Las Flores Canyon Road in Malibu, and other remote helipads, resulting in a substantial cause of the harm alleged herein. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that the straight line one-way distance between the San Ynez Reservoir and the Bravo 69 helipad is 3.4 miles. They believe that the straight line distance between the San Ynez Reservoir and the Camp 8 helipad is 4.2 miles. Round-trip flights to and from these remote helipads would double these distances. Now, how much time do you think that added to the firefight? How much delay did that create in the firefight? Well, they calculated this because Trey is a very smart guy. This is why he's the lead attorney here. Based upon an analysis of the water-dropping helicopters' flight patterns on January 7th, the 4 LAFD water-dropping helicopters and 3 LA County Fire Department water-dropping helicopters, which were used to provide water drops within the fire perimeter between 10:35 a.m. and 7 p.m. on January 7th, spent a total of 6 hours and 25 minutes outside of Pacific Palisades to refill their water tanks because the San Ynez Reservoir was empty. 6 hours, 6.5 hours of delay that could have been spent dropping water on the Palisades. They spent a combined total of 6.5 hours outside of the fire zone because they had to travel farther to get water because the San Ynez Reservoir was empty. They believe that this significant delay for these helicopters to leave the Palisades fire zone to refill their water tanks at remote helipads allowed the fire to spread in a rapid and uncontrolled manner, causing damage to the plaintiffs. This is damning, but it gets worse. The plaintiffs are further informed and believe that had the Palisades Reservoir, also known as the Chautauqua Reservoir, been filled while the San Ynez Reservoir was out of service, its helipad could have been used to refill water-dropping helicopters without the need for them to fly to remote helipads outside of the Palisades. Look at the location of this reservoir. Look at that. And look at the damage around there. Pretty convenient. If you had copters ripping laps off of that helispot right there, the time in between drops would be significantly reduced, and you could do a lot of damage. Look, you can't guarantee that water is going to stop this fire, and this is going to be a challenge with this lawsuit. It's not insurmountable, but this is a challenge. You're dealing with a counterfactual, right? We don't have another exact test case where you can prove that had they had more water or more frequent water drops, they would be able to stop this fire. And how do you identify which homes would have been spared if they had been going a little bit faster? This is a counterfactual. We don't have an alternate universe where we can compare these two, but just use logic, right? Just make the tautological argument. Do we really believe that more water wouldn't have helped? Couldn't have hurt, at the very least. And I think the defendants are going to have to prove that more water wouldn't help. And if that's the case, why do we even carry water on fire trucks? Why do they even drop water? What's the point? Well, obviously because it helps. Because it helps. Now, you can't guarantee that you'd be able to stop any one structure from burning once it's involved, but you could have put out spot fires deeper into the neighborhood. That's why I always say, like, that initial attack is so important. You got to get it early while it's still small. Once it gets established, you don't really have much of a chance. So the plaintiffs are further informed and believe that LADWP's press release stating that, quote, water pressure in the system was lost due to unprecedented and extreme water demand to fight the wildfire without aerial support, is false. As alleged above, numerous water-dropping helicopters engaged in aerial support to fight the fire. I don't know where LADWP is getting off saying this. We know that there were copters flying over this fire. There were super scoopers flying over this fire. Like, how could they possibly think that they could fool people into saying there was no aerial support? Like, at what point are they talking about? I mean, there were times when the copters were grounded, sure, but like there was aerial support on this fire. This is ridiculous. However, because of the lack of water supply in LADWP's system in the Palisades, these water-dropping helicopters were forced to fly miles away from the fire to fill their water tanks, thus losing critical hours to fight the fire. They allege 6.5 hours of firefighting time was lost. So why was that reservoir not operational? We only hear about the Santa Ynez Reservoir. Why not Palisades Reservoir? Well, according to this complaint, in March of 2024, LADWP began to plan to refill the Palisades Reservoir at the top of Chautauqua Boulevard, which had been out of service since July of 2013. This is why we haven't been talking about this reservoir, which is like just at the top of, look at this location. It's right above where we had the most nuclear destruction. Right above it. And yet we don't talk about it. Well, the reason why is because it's been offline for more than a decade. And so we just forgot that it's even a thing. So they had a plan in place to utilize this and refill it as an alternate source of water while the Santa Ynez Reservoir was undergoing repairs. However, the suit alleges shortly after LADWP began preparing to refill the Palisades Reservoir, which has a concrete cover, leaks and structural concerns were discovered by LADWP. In a March 29th, 2024 email, an LADWP manager of property management stated, about number 2, looks like Palisades Res is off the table since Civil Structural deemed the roof unsafe and employees shouldn't be inside. So the roof was about to cave in. They said, we don't know what Water Control's Plan B looks like. What? They don't know what their Plan B looks like? This complaint goes on to say that plaintiffs are informed to believe that LADWP had no Plan B to provide the Palisades with a backup source of water storage while the Santa Ynez Reservoir was drained for repairs to the cover. Despite the decision in March of 2024 that the Palisades Reservoir was structurally unsound and could not be put back into service temporarily as a Plan B while the Santa Ynez Reservoir was drained for repairs, inexplicably, in June of 2024, LADWP issued an internal email from its Water Operations Division stating, quote, the Pacific Palisades Reservoir will be returned to service after being out of service for over a decade. The reservoir is currently being cleaned with an inlet-outlet line modification. Placing the reservoir into service was necessary, especially during the summer months as the Santa Ynez Reservoir is out of service due to a major tear on its floating cover. A contract is currently being implemented for the repair of the tear, end quote. So here they are in an email claiming that it's being put into service, but they had already determined it's unsafe for their workers to be in there. So this complaint goes on to say the plaintiffs are informed and believe that this statement was false, as LADWP had previously deemed the Palisades Reservoir unsafe months earlier, and no contract had been implemented to repair the tear in the cover of the Santa Ynez Reservoir. Indeed, as alleged, that contract would not be awarded to this company that was going to do the repair until November 21st of 2024. So not only was the Santa Ynez Reservoir offline since what, April? Right, here we are thinking like, oh, okay, well, if they had it offline during January, who can blame them for thinking January was a safe time to do it? No, it had been offline for almost the entire year. And they didn't even award a contract to outsource its repair until November. November is when you get these fires, traditionally, right? That's when you get the Woolsey fire. It's when you get the 93 Old Topanga fire. They didn't even award the contract till then. So this reservoir was offline during the worst possible time. Now, what was happening with that reservoir? Here's an aerial photo. It is alleged that LADWP failed to perform any interim repair to stop the propagation of this tear in the cover, which only continued to worsen over time. It is believed that LADWP began draining the Santa Ynez Reservoir on or about February 27th. They started draining the reservoir back in February. So that means it was at least at diminished capacity for almost a year until this fire happened. So on or about February 27, 2024, of its 56 million gallons of water, which was discharged into the Pacific Ocean. Oh, God. Oh, my God. California gets this rap of, you know, Trump always says this, right? How they're just dumping water in the Pacific Ocean. They're literally doing that. They dumped how many? 56 million gallons of water into the Pacific. On the morning of January 8th, 2025, the second day of the Palisades fire, Andrea Yip, a property manager in LADWP's water operations, sent an email at 8:52 in the morning stating, this is January 8th, so this is the day after the Palisades fire started. And she said in an email, quote, "Our management has reprioritized the repair of this reservoir and would like it to happen sooner due to the recent fires in the Pacific Palisades." Oh my God. Dude, you cannot make this up. I have to read that again. This is day 2 of the Palisades fire. So people's homes are actively burning. And Andrea Yip allegedly sent an email at 8:52 in the morning, nearly 24 hours into the Palisades fire, saying, quote, "Our management has reprioritized the repair of this reservoir and would like it to happen sooner due to the recent fire in the Palisades." Too late, lady. So now you want to prioritize it when the entire neighborhood is burning down? You gotta be fucking kidding me. Dude, this is so much worse than anybody thought. And the thing is like, everybody has these conspiratorial claims, like this was deliberate, like they wanted to burn it down. This is the pedos covering their tracks. The thing that I always tell people, it's like, government loves your fucking conspiracy theories. You know why? Is because it's just plain old bureaucratic incompetence that's at fault for this stuff. These people are fucking morons. These people are fucking Now, this is my editorializing, just so you know. This isn't part of trade laws here, okay? This is my soapbox here. These people are fucking morons. This is why it drives me crazy when you guys blame climate change, when you blame space lasers, when you blame fucking Dr. Evil for shutting off the fire hydrants. No, that's not what happened. Some fucking moron didn't do their job. And it wasn't until half of the neighborhood had burned down and a dozen people got killed that this fucking moron decides, hey, we want to repair this thing as soon as fucking possible. What the fuck is wrong with these people? Okay, off my soapbox. We're going to go back to Trey's very, very well organized complaint here. So just to restate this email, she says, "Our management has reprioritized the repair of this reservoir and would like it to happen sooner due to the recent fire in the Palisades," meaning the fire that's currently burning. She continues, "What is the earliest date your crews would be available to be on site for repairs?" Is she thinking that they're going to come in and like fill this reservoir like by end of day and start dropping on the fire? My God. So the complaint continues. Of course, the entire Pacific Palisades was on fire and being consumed by the worst conflagration in the city's history when this email was sent. We are governed by the dumbest motherfuckers on the planet. Now, when you hear cussing, it's to identify that this is not a part of the complaint. This is not Mr. Robertson's complaint. This is me talking, just so you understand that there's a separation here. Let's continue. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that hours later on January 8th, Andrea Yip was asked to provide a timeline of the San Ynez floating cover repair to her supervisors. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that Ms. Yip sent her original timeline to her supervisors at 12:34 p.m. Shortly thereafter, Ms. Yip attempted to recall that email. What? What? She attempted to recall the email? At 4:52 p.m. Ms. Yip sent a revised timeline of the San Ynez reservoir cover repair with the title, quote, "Before any changes as a result of the fires," end quote. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that by this time, LADWP was in full damage control mode. That's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious. Holy shit. Continue. Plaintiffs are informed to believe that at 4:16 p.m. on January 8th, Don Cottrell of LADWP sent an email to Miss Yip asking for information about the status of the repair project to the San Ynez Reservoir. In that email, Ms. Cottrell stated, quote, I reached out to Manuel Reynoso regarding the status of the San Ynez Reservoir, but he is out until February 4th. Do you have any information on it? I understand it was drained last year for repair work. Can you provide an update? Do you know if the community was notified about the work? We need this as soon as possible. I understand it has to do with our current Palisades fire response. End quote. My God, dude. This is while the neighborhood is burning. They're sending these emails. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that in response to this email, Ms. Yip sent a reply back to Ms. Cottrell at 4:20 p.m. on January 8th, day 2 of the Palisades fire, stating, quote, yes, it is still out of service. We recently got a contractor on board to perform repairs, which was scheduled in the coming months. The start date was still pending, so the community was not notified yet. So not only did they take until November to get this contractor on board to fix this repair, they didn't even have a start date. They didn't even know when they were going to commence work. Was it even going to be in 2025 at all? Going on with the complaint, they allege that the LADWP's decision to ignore the requirements to perform annual underwater inspection of the San Ynez Reservoir resulted in the need to drain the entire reservoir in 2024 and remove from the Pacific Palisades 97.5% of the water storage capacity available for firefighting. They drained 97.5% of the Palisades water supply. Continuing. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that LADWP made a policy decision to benefit from the cost savings from declining to pursue a reasonable maintenance program for the cover of the San Ynez Reservoir. This, quote, wait until it breaks plan of maintenance to save on the cost of properly inspecting, repairing, or replacing the cover resulted in fire hydrants running dry during this fire, which is an inherent risk posed by LADWP's chosen maintenance plan. So this suit is alleging that because they weren't doing their job and they weren't adequately maintaining this reservoir, that's why the tear in that cover got so bad. Because they were like trying to save money by not doing annual inspections. Now, if this is true, that's really bad. This is really bad. You think that's bad though? It gets so much worse. It gets so much worse, guys. Oh, I gotta adjust my neck before we start this. You guys ready for the real bad part? We're gonna recall some stuff that I mentioned early on, and I'm gonna ask this again before we continue. We focused on the ignition of the Palisades fire, right? And most people now believe, who know what they're talking about, most people now believe it was a rekindle from the Lockman fire. Why do we believe it was just one ignition? That's the question. Why do we believe it was just one? What does that look like? Moving on with this complaint, plaintiffs are informed and believe that in 2010, 15 years before the fire, LADWP proposed a power pole replacement project to replace approximately 220 aging wood power poles with steel poles between Mulholland Drive along the Temescal Fire Road to above the Summit neighborhood in the Palisades Highlands. Remember we were talking about the Palisades Highlands earlier? Confused why that burned? Remember we heard that radio traffic? Remember that? Let's replay it real quick.
Truck 69, we're on Chastain. Add Calle Victoria. These houses look okay. Do we have a new destination?
Now, that's near the origin of the fire. This is 23 saying, hey, these houses look okay. They're out of alignment with the wind, right? So the wind was taking it towards the ocean. Now, generally speaking, you're kind of good if you are behind the heel of the fire. Because the heel, again, like, I'm sorry if this is repetitive for people who understand wildfire, but a lot of people who don't like eat and breathe this stuff, they don't understand. Fires are very directional, right? Especially a wind-driven fire like this. The heel of the fire is going to be the lowest intensity of fire. So you've got the head of the fire, which has the highest intensity. The flanks, they have considerably less, right? So the way that you attack a fire is you start at the heel because that is your lowest intensity, and you button up that back door. You cut line around the back door because you can get in there, right? That's where the lowest fire activity is. You do what's called anchor, flank, and then pinch, okay? So you anchor at the heel of the fire, and then you slowly take bites out of those flanks because it's not as hot as the flaming front. You flank it, flank it, flank it, and then you just start taking little bites out of the fire's edge of the flaming front and slowly pinch it off. You can't just get right in front of the flaming front. It's going to roll right over you, okay? So you start at the heel. That's where the lowest intensity is. It just builds momentum as it goes. Now, the Highlands, the Summit neighborhood, I don't know why homes would burn down there because they're in the part that's going to be burning the least intensely and the part where the crews are going to immediately go to cut line, right? So those hand crews, they need to anchor the fire first. It's the first thing that you do. This is true on every single fire. Anchor, flank, pinch in that order, okay? So the first area of the fire that's going to get secured is the anchor. It's the first area. The Summit neighborhood is where the anchor of the fire would be. So now, they wanted to replace these power poles leading up to the Summit neighborhood in the Palisades Highlands. So it goes on in the complaint to say, in a press release, LADWP admitted that, quote, these current wood poles were installed between 1935 and 1955 and are past their useful service life. The new steel poles are more resistant to high wind and fire threats. Now, allegedly, LADWP started this project in 2019, but it was halted when it was discovered that LADWP had bulldozed and destroyed hundreds of endangered Broughton's milk vetch plants. This makes me want to kvetch. They didn't replace these hazardous power poles because they had bulldozed and destroyed hundreds of endangered Broughton's milk vetch plants. You know what else destroys plants? A fucking wildfire. California's priorities are so fucked. This is what drives me crazy. Look, I'm an environmentalist at heart, but they literally cannot see the forest for the trees, literally. So they will fight to save these little plants. They'll fight to save a tree. And then in the process, that tree falls on a power line and burns up every tree in the fucking forest. Going on. Now, remember, this is the skeleton key for understanding this live stream. If there's cussing, that's me talking. It's not this amended complaint that was filed today. So allegedly, LADWP started this project in 2019, but it was halted when it was discovered that LADWP had bulldozed and destroyed hundreds of endangered Broughton's milk vetch plants. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that on Wednesday, January 8th, 2025, while investigating the origin and cause of the Palisades fire, plaintiffs' attorneys discovered that terminal pole 369211M had snapped during the wind event, causing portions of the Royal Monte Grande 34.5 kilovolt power line to fall to the ground near the suspected origin of the Palisades fire. Below are photographs of the broken wood poles and downed power lines above LADWP's Temescal water tank located above the Summit neighborhood in Palisades Highlands, taken on January 8th, 2025. Look at that. This is just above the point of origin of the fire and above the Highlands, where some homes burned, inexplicably. Now, we looked at the origin of the fire, and where these power lines are, it's a little bit too north. It's too north of the origin of the fire to, in my mind, be the origin of the Palisades fire. But like I said, was there only one ignition? When asked if these downed power lines were energized on the day of the fire, LADWP told a reporter from the Washington Post. How do we feel about the Washington Post, guys? Remember, they were the source that I was citing from that last live stream where it was claimed that LAFD screwed up and didn't respond for 45 minutes, maybe even 90 minutes. LADWP told a reporter from the Washington Post on January 12th, 2025, that those lines had been abandoned and de-energized for the past 5 years. That's what I heard too. Okay, so early on when I was saying this probably isn't arson, it's probably power lines, because that's what caused the Thomas Fire, Woolsey Fire, Camp Fire. It's the most common cause of these nasty wind-driven fires is power lines. I had heard that they'd been de-energized. LADWP here says that they've been de-energized for the past 5 years and were not energized at the time of the fire. Incredibly, LADWP never publicly corrected this statement until months later. So that was untrue. They didn't correct the statement until months later when LADWP's attorney finally admitted to plaintiff's counsel on March 20th, 2025, buried in a footnote on the last page of a letter. So they didn't want to admit this. They buried this admission in a footnote that the following stunning admission, quote, "You also asked about a statement in the Washington Post that the sub-transmission line in the area was not energized. The statement was a result of a misunderstanding. The line had been de-energized for several years before the fire, but as we said in our prior correspondence, it was energized at the time the fire ignited." You guys catch that? So it was, of course, it wasn't a lie to the Washington Post. It was a misunderstanding. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Maybe the Washington Post reporters are so bad that what they were told is this was de-energized years ago, but it came back online, and they just reported the first part of that quote. Maybe they did that. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe it was just an honest mistake on everybody's part, right? Let's just go with that. Let's give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But at the end of the day, these power lines were energized at the time of the fire. It gets worse. It gets worse. Because again, I don't think these power lines started the Palisades fire, right? They're a little too far north. It would be too far for like some hot slag from that line to go and start that fire. But it's actually worse than that. So after they admitted that, yes, those power lines were energized, and it was just that quote in the Washington Post was a misunderstanding, plaintiffs are informed and believe that on March 23rd, 2025, certain plaintiffs filed a complaint against LADWP alleging that the Royal Monte Grande 34.5 kilovolt line was not de-energized after the Palisades fire had started. What? And that this energized line started a second ignition of the fire at approximately 10:30 p.m. on January 7th, near the location of the broken terminal pole pictured above. In response to that lawsuit, LADWP issued a press release on March 25th denying that this power line was energized and stating that the line was manually de-energized by opening switches on the Encino side of the line around 2:15 p.m. on January 7th. Now, keep in mind, that's 4 hours into the firefight, and these lines hadn't been de-energized. This is, just so you know, whenever there's a firefight, they always want the power lines de-energized, okay? Because they're a hazard, right? The power poles are going to burn down, and then you're going to have energized lines. This is a hazard. Number one, it's a hazard for fire crews because they're going to be working under these lines. Firefight, like aerial firefighters, they don't want to be dropping on energized lines, right? Because they could cause an arc, they could cause a secondary fire. So you often will hear them over the radio like, hey, can we confirm that these lines are de-energized before I send my guys under there to work? So these should have been de-energized. Now they're claiming that they de-energized them after falsely claiming that they weren't energized in the first place. They're claiming that 4 hours into the firefight on January 7th, that it was not energized thereafter, that they shut it off manually at 2:15 p.m. Now, the plaintiffs are informed and believe that LADWP's claims that it had de-energized this line were again false. Specifically, plaintiffs are informed and believe that while LADWP manually opened 4 poles top switches between its distribution station 122 on the Encino side of the Royal Monte Grande line, in the afternoon of January 7th, it never disabled the load interrupting devices at DS99 on the Palisades side of the line. The result is that a portion of the line remained energized, including that portion between DS99 near the San Ynez Reservoir and terminal pole 369211 Mike above the Summit neighborhood. So the one line that you don't want energized at the heel of the fire over the homes that were in a pretty good position to potentially survive this fire because the fire was moving away from them, the one line that you don't want energized was apparently still energized. What? LADWP's claim that it had de-energized this line by no later than 2:15 p.m. on January 7th is easily disproven by the numerous videos taken by its own surveillance cameras mounted on the Temescal water tank that show that lights were on in the Summit neighborhood during the evening hours of January 7th. Further, gets worse. LADWP's operator's log shows no personnel entered DS99 between January 2nd and January 12th of 2025, further corroborating that no LADWP personnel entered the building to disable any load interrupter device to de-energize the Palisades side of the Royal Monte Grande line on January 7th. Now, they talked about the cameras proving that the lights were still on. This screenshot taken from LADWP's Temescal Trailhead surveillance camera clearly shows that lights were on in the homes located in the Summit at 10:34 p.m. on January 7th, while the fire raged below near the bottom of Palisades Drive. These fire cams, and this one's sponsored by LADWP, which is good, and they're a great asset. They're time-stamped, so you can invalidate these claims. Now, it's believed that at approximately 10:36 p.m., a large electrical arcing event was captured by the LADWP's Temescal Trailhead 1 camera in the area between terminal pole 369211 Mike and the Temescal water tank. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that the screenshot from LADWP's Temescal Trailhead camera at 10:34, 2 minutes before the arcing event, shows no fire activity between terminal pole 369211 Mike and the water tank. And I would agree. That's what I believe I'm looking at as well. Especially at night, you can see when there's fire. So if there's a little spot fire, because of the exposure, it would bloom out. It would be very obvious, right? Fire's it looks a lot bigger at night. I don't see any fire in between those power lines and that tank. Here, 2 minutes later, at 10:36, a bright flash or explosion is captured by the Temescal Trailhead 1 camera, occurring between terminal pole 369211 Mike and the water tank, near the base of an LADWP power pole. They believe that this arcing event was the result of LADWP's failure to de-energize the line during this high wind event, which caused LADWP's energized power lines to slap together. This is called line slap, or fall to the ground, which would be a ground fault, igniting the vegetation below and causing a second ignition of the Palisades fire. And this would be behind the heel of the fire, right? The whole point of anchor, flank, and pinch is to secure that back door so it doesn't go in the other direction. That way you only got to fight fire 180 degrees. If you got to fight 360 degrees, you're screwed. Plaintiffs are further informed and believe that LADWP's electrical equipment located at DS99 is outdated and antiquated, and LADWP's failure to reasonably maintain the equipment was a substantial cause of the harm to the Pacific Palisades community. For example, DS99 isn't equipped with electronic relays, but rather relies upon electromechanical relays, which do not record SCADA data or line faults. Instead, DS99 is equipped with fuses and load interrupted devices. Plaintiffs are further informed and believe that LADWP attempted to, but failed to de-energize its power lines located in the Palisades Village and surrounding neighborhoods, Alphabet Streets, Via Bluffs, Huntington, etc., during the firestorm. Specifically, LADWP's own records show that a patrolman was ordered to de-energize Distribution Station 29, DS29, located on Sunset Boulevard in the center of the Palisades Village at 1:40 p.m. on January 7th. LADWP records show that the patrolman did not arrive at DS29 until 6:03, 4 hours and 23 minutes after the request had been made. Now, look, man, remember that a bunch of morons abandoned their cars on Palisades Drive, and they had to get bulldozers in there to clear them out, which, I mean, dude, if we're going to hold people liable, what about all those morons who abandoned their cars and blocked firefighters? So it could be that, LADWP was also stalled by these residents who left their vehicles and took their keys with them for some strange reason. So we'll give a little bit of benefit of the doubt, but at the end of the day, the records are showing that the patrolman did not arrive until 6:03 p.m., nearly 4.5 hours after the request had been made to shut down this distribution station. Records further reflect that the patrolman attempted to de-energize the circuits inside DS29 at 6:18 p.m., but the, quote, dead man cord used to de-energize circuits in an emergency didn't work, and that no circuits were de-energized. The patrolman then had to evacuate because the fire was right there. LADWP's records further show that on January 29th, nearly 3 weeks after LADWP's patrolman went back into LADWP's computer log and attempted to alter his entry made 22 days earlier. What? This is alleging that this guy went back into the LADWP computer log and attempted to alter his entry made 22 days earlier during the fire to claim that he had attempted to de-energize the circuits in DS29 at 1:47 p.m. instead of 6:18 p.m. Dude, if this is true, if this allegation is true, not only did they not get things done in time, but they're trying to go back and alter records, allegedly, trying to go back and alter records to show that they didn't screw up. My God, I told you this was going to get worse. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that DS29 was constructed in 1936 and lacks modern electronic relays or substation automation. Instead, it has electromechanical relays which are over 50 years old. This is crazy. Here's the evidence they're submitting. Go ahead and read this. Tell me what you see. What do you see? LADWP failed to de-energize its distribution and transmission electrical facilities, which resulted in its overhead power lines arcing and power poles breaking, sending energized power lines falling to the ground into receptive fuel beds that ignited additional spot fires that rapidly spread and merged together to create the urban conflagration known as the Palisades Fire. Plaintiffs are further informed and believe that because LADWP did not de-energize its electrical circuits even after the Palisades Fire erupted, its distribution equipment throughout Pacific Palisades experienced arcing and exploding transformers, sending showers of sparks and molten metal raining down onto homes, businesses, and vegetation below, which started additional spot fires that accelerated the rapid spread of the Palisades Fire. Now, this email allegedly shows someone identifying that Gonzalo Mendoza changed the log entry time from 1818 to 1347. Holy mackerel, dude. Dude, if this is true, like LADWP is trying to make it, or someone at LADWP is trying to make it look as though they shut off the power hours before they actually did, and they're changing logs to do that. Maybe there's an explanation for this, right? Like maybe there was an error in communication, right? That, like, I don't know. You have to look. There's going to be a response to this. There's going to be a defense, obviously, but this certainly doesn't look good, right? This looks horrible. Now, what we can say for sure, there was energy going to those lines. So you want to know how we know this? Look at that. What does that look like? Does that look like those lines are de-energized to you? That's a transformer showering sparks into this neighborhood. There's more. Look at that. Look at that cascade. Now, unlike that previous image, there's no fire on the ground here. So now you've got power lines that are throwing new spot fires ahead of the flaming front. And what you have to understand is embers are bad, but the hot slag that comes off of these power lines is brutal, right? Because it's got this like way higher residual heat. Look at how many sparks there are. They're claiming that the lines were de-energized. Now, how do we know it was a problem in the Highlands? This looks like it's in the village. This area looks like it's in the village, right? Where we see obviously energized lines throwing sparks all over, potentially starting new spot fires. How do we know it was a problem up in the Highlands? Look, I don't know if you can read this. This is someone's Instagram post, Jason Stillwell. Sketchy moments when a hand crew is forced to back out due to arcing high tension power lines. These guys were right under the tower when the fire got into the power lines and they began to arc. Just another danger these guys and gals are facing on the fire line. This is a camp crew. This is an inmate crew. And remember what I said, how, when there's an incident, you got to shut down the power lines because these guys can't work under that stuff. They're going to get killed. But like, what else did we talk about? Where are the hand crews going to be going? They're going to be going to the heel of the fire. That's where they're starting. They're going to anchor, flank, and pinch. So in an area where the hand crews are, that's an area where you are starting to get a handle on the fire and you're going direct and you're cutting line to try to secure that area. If you've got power lines that are arcing and sparking in that specific spot, not only are you disrupting the firefight because these guys have to back out of there, like that's bad enough, right? The energized lines are disrupting the firefight, but they're also potentially throwing hot slag right over their line. So all of this line construction that they've been doing, it's for nothing. It's for nothing. We have more evidence. Mobile home park is where my cousin had a home. Further, plaintiffs are informed to believe that LADWP's failure to de-energize its distribution power equipment resulted in pole fires, as depicted in this screenshot from an eyewitness video taken on January 7th on Pacific Coast Highway, approximately 3:36 p.m. in front of the Malibu Village Mobile Home Park. Plaintiffs are informed to believe that shortly after this video was taken, the entire mobile home park caught fire and burned to the ground as a result of this pole fire. Maybe something else caused that fire of that power pole. Doesn't look good. And mobile home parks go up like matchsticks. They had no chance. More evidence. Plaintiffs also are informed and believe that LADWP's downed and energized distribution power lines caused additional fires in Pacific Palisades on January 7th. As just one example, below are photographs of LADWP's downed power lines, which fell onto the guest house of Donald and Lisa McCord, located at 15033 West Sunset Boulevard, Pacific Palisades on January 7th. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that these power lines were energized when they fell onto the McCord's guest house, which caused the fire that destroyed that structure. Here are the photos of their down power lines on the McCord's guest house. Now, chicken or the egg, it can be difficult to tell, right? The power lines on the fires that I've been on, even after they're de-energized, they'll end up falling all over the place. I've had to dodge them all the time. You avoid them, right? You don't drive over them just in case they're still energized. You never really know. They should be. And the thing is, my God, I probably took way more risks than I should have, because clearly LADWP isn't de-energizing when we all think they should be. At least according to what these allegations are, I probably should have been a lot more careful. I always presumed, oh, these lines are down. They're not powered. My God. So we don't know. Maybe these lines fell after this house burned. Maybe the house burning is what knocked down the power pole. But this is interesting evidence. A further example, plaintiffs are further informed to believe that an LADWP wood power pole snapped, causing energized distribution power lines to fall onto an apartment building located at 855 Via de la Paz, Pacific Palisades, causing the structure to catch fire and burn to the ground. Below is a photograph of the snapped power pole, which belongs to LADWP, and downed conductors, which plaintiffs are informed and believe caused the damage to this building. They believe that these are just two examples of LADWP's energized power lines causing structures to catch fire on January 7th, because LADWP failed to de-energize their power lines even after the Palisades fire ignited in Topanga State Park during extreme fire weather conditions. Oh man, dude, if these allegations are true, and just based on the evidence that we're looking, I mean, those images of hot slag getting thrown down, obviously there's energy there. That deep into the firefight, I don't see a good reason why those things should be energized. Maybe there is a good reason. You know, maybe they needed to supply power to water pumps. I don't know, but normally they would rather play it safe and just cut off all the power. So what we're seeing is they failed to de-energize the lines apparently, and this may have caused additional fires that didn't need to be there, as if the fire weren't bad enough with those winds and the horrible brush clearance throughout the neighborhood. On that note, it gets worse. Now, we've been focusing on the LADWP with their water issues and the electricity, and it looks really bad. How about we punch up? Now, if you recall in our last live stream, one of the things that I was saying was that it's taking so long for us to get answers on this stuff for a reason. If it had been a wizard who started this fire, you would hear about it right away. If this had been an arsonist, you'd hear about it right away, typically, right? Especially a high-profile case like this. Because ultimately, a wizard with his shopping cart is not going to be able to pay the damages for the liability on this fire. So there's not going to be drawn-out litigation. There's just going to be a real simple criminal proceeding. That's it. Book them. The only reason why these things take this long, especially with how good our fire investigators are, is because they've determined, or they know, that something or some agency very powerful is liable, potentially liable. The only reason it would take this long to hear answers about it is because the people involved, or the agencies involved, can pay. They can pay, or at least partially. So it gets worse. It's not just LADWP. I hope Governor Newsom is watching this part. Look at this property. Look at this property full of dry grass. Let's get a little background on this. Did you know that city government owns a bunch of property in the Palisades? A lot of lots. From this amended complaint, plaintiffs are informed to believe that the city owns numerous vacant lots in the Pacific Palisades, including, but not limited to, 17919 Porto Marino Way, 17857 Porto Marino Way, 17863 Porto Marino Way, 17908, 17916 Castellamare, and 17945 Porto Marino Way in Pacific Palisades. Additionally, they believe that the city owns a single-family home located at 17909 Porto Marino Way, which had been abandoned for several years prior to the fire and was in disrepair with overgrown brush on the property on January 7th. They believe that one of the plaintiffs repeatedly sent emails to the city complaining about the city's lack of brush clearance on these residences at these lots that the city owns at 17904, 17908, 17916 Castellamare Drive. Beginning in December of 2023, this plaintiff was emailing the city. In response to their complaints, on December 14th, 2023, the Los Angeles Fire Department Brush Clearance Unit responded, telling them, quote, "The inspector has already addressed these properties." Well, on September 15th, 2024, the plaintiff emailed inspectors Almanza and Sutton of the LAFD Brush Clearance Unit and complained that the above-referenced city-owned lots had not been cleared of overgrown brush. On September 16th, 2024, LAFD Inspector Sutton emailed the plaintiff stating, quote, "Two of the properties are privately owned. They have been cited each twice and are going out to contract to be cleared by city contractors in 2 weeks from this Thursday. The other two properties are city-owned. They were contracted out, cleared earlier this season in the spring, and have now some regrowth. I will see if we have funds to contract them out a second time this season, but we currently are going through budget cuts." Oh my God. Do you catch that? So two of the properties he's claiming are private and they've been cited to clear their brush, but two of the lots are owned by the city. They had been cleared earlier, but there's regrowth, right? So this is all about maintenance. You got to do this multiple times. And then he's saying, I'll try to get it cleared, but because of budget cuts, I don't know if we can afford to take a weed whip out there and cut down some vegetation. This is how bad the Los Angeles city budget is. They can't even afford to cut some plants down. What do we do with this? Now, we're going to see the consequences of this in a minute. So this plaintiff then replied and said, "Hello, Inspector Warren. I'm following up on our emails below. I wanted to bring to your attention that the brush was cut, but it was not cleared. Therefore, there's currently cut, dry brush, which is even worse, sitting on these two privately owned lots, and I believe still poses a fire danger. Please see the photos attached. I hope that you can ask whomever cut it to come back and clear it." See, here we have a responsible resident who is appropriately narking on irresponsible residents and irresponsible property owners. This is the problem. A lot of people will say, I clear my brush, but my neighbors don't. We all have to row together, right? Because if you're just one person, you cleared your brush, but 5 homes all around you didn't do it, their house is going to end up wiping out yours, and it kind of doesn't matter. So like everyone has to row together. And good on this person for staying on the agency to follow up and make sure that it gets done properly. Man, this is brutal. This is brutal. And you can see this pretty dense grass, dry grass. That's very volatile. Like it would take just the tiniest little spark to get that going. Now, were there consequences to them not doing this? They didn't clear this. They didn't clear these areas because they were worried about budget issues. So they couldn't afford to take a weed whip up there for 45 minutes. What are the consequences? Here's somebody's security camera footage. Approximately 1:20 p.m. on January 7th, embers from the Palisades fire landed in overgrown brush on the city's vacant lot, located at 17908 Castellamare Drive, and started a spot fire, which you can see here. Let me maximize this, which spread to an adjacent city-owned lot. This is government-owned property at 17919 Porto Marino Way, and to the vacant and abandoned house owned by the city, located at 17909 Porto Marino Way. Below is a screenshot taken from CCTV security cameras, which shows the beginning of the spot fire burning on the city-owned vacant lot, located at 17908 Castellamare Drive. So you have city-owned, government-owned property that has not been properly maintained. They didn't follow their own protocols for clearing brush. It was reported by responsible residents, and now it's catching fire. Now the fire has spotted into these areas, and it is spreading. You can see that. Look at that. Unreal. It is believed that the fire on these city-owned properties spread uncontrolled to adjacent homes in the Castellamare section of the Palisades, including but not limited to the homes owned by the plaintiff, the person who was trying to get their neighbors, including city government, to do the responsible thing. Plaintiffs are further informed and believe that the fire on these city-owned, government-owned properties are contributed to the overall spread of the fire into other neighborhoods as well. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that the overgrown and or cut brush, which was left in situ and not removed from these city-owned lots, violated the city's own brush clearance ordinance. It's the LA Municipal Code 57.4906.5.1, which provides, quote, no person who has any ownership or possessory interest in or control of a parcel of land shall allow to exist thereon any hazardous refuse or hazardous weeds, trees, or other vegetation which by reason of proximity to a building or structure constitutes a fire hazard. For purposes of this section, hazardous weeds, trees, or other vegetation are defined as weeds, trees, or other vegetation which are in such a condition and location as to provide a ready fuel supply to augment the spread or intensity of a fire. This is everybody in Southern California, by the way. This is everybody. Everybody. I feel like Gary Oldman in The Professional. Everyone is violating this code. It also provides vegetation within 100 feet of buildings. Remove from the property all dead trees and maintain all weeds and all other vegetation at a height of no more than 3 inches. It's like from Elf. 3 inches. Except as otherwise provided therein, if such weeds or other vegetation are within 100 feet of a building or structure located on such property or an adjacent property. Further, it makes a violation of the city's brush clearance ordinances a public nuisance. The council finds that uncontrolled or high weeds, brush, plant material, and other items prohibited under sections 57.4906.5.1 through 57.4906.5119 increase the danger of fire and thus constitute a public nuisance. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that the city, that's government, violated its own brush clearance ordinance by allowing weeds and other vegetation to exist on the aforementioned city-owned lots on January 7th in excess of 3 inches in height within 100 feet of structures, which constituted a fire hazard and a ready fuel supply, which augmented the spread and intensity of the Palisades fire in the Castellamare neighborhood of Pacific Palisades, as well as contributing to the overall spread of the fire into other neighborhoods as well. So you have city-owned lots where they weren't doing the brush clearance that is mandated by law. And because of that, spot fires readily spread and extended into other properties, further extending this fire. What do you do with this? What do we do with this? How do we hold people accountable? Who's accountable for this? I don't know the answer to this, but this complaint is a good step forward. I told you it takes about 6 to 12 months for there to be any initial accountability for major wildfires like this, and here we are at the 6-month mark, and they're like right on time. We're finally getting some accountability, and we're getting a better picture of what happened. And this power line issue, if this is true, this is brutal, because now we have multiple ignitions. Because look, the water thing is going to be debated ad nauseum, and one of the challenges that they're going to face on this portion of it is, you know, the defendants are going to say, well, look, all the residents blocked ingress to the area, and that's the real reason, like firefighters couldn't get in there because all these cars were blocking them. That's why those houses caught on fire. It wasn't because of us. It wasn't because of our reservoir. Well, what about the helicopters, right? We saw in this very detailed complaint that the helicopters lost, what, like 6.5 hours? 6.5 hours of time in the fire zone because they had to go like triple the distance to a remote helispot in order to get water. So their load and return took so much longer, which obviously delays the firefight. That has to contribute. But who do we hold accountable for this? In this complaint, the LADWP looks terrible. And it looks like they were changing logs. Now, I wonder if the governor is watching this stream yet. Where did this fire start? Where did this fire start? Now, we talked about this earlier. Governor Newsom, who's in the middle of his 2028 presidential campaign, he has abandoned his constituents in California, right? He's in South Carolina doing a little tour, disaster tour. And he's been doing full court press where he's trying to badger the feds, right? Because he's running for national office now. And so any chance he can get, he's talking about this fire started on federal lands. It's getting really obnoxious. And while, yes, the feds absolutely need to do their work, California hamstrings the feds from doing their work. And I have some inside information on the Eaton fire, which doesn't get as much attention as the Palisades, but pertaining to this issue of the feds being handcuffed, man, the Eaton fire doesn't look good either. And I will get into that another time. But I want to focus on where this fire started. It started in Topanga State Park. Now, this complaint goes into this. California Government Code 835 states in pertinent part, except as provided by statute, a public entity is liable for injury caused by a dangerous condition of its property if the plaintiff establishes that the property was in a dangerous condition at the time of the injury. You hear that? We're asking who's liable? Who's liable for all this? Well, according to California Government Code, a public entity is liable for injury caused by a dangerous condition of its property if the plaintiff establishes that the property was in a dangerous condition at the time of the injury, that the injury was proximately caused by the dangerous condition, that the dangerous condition created a foreseeable risk of that kind of injury which was incurred, and either a negligent or wrongful act or omission of an employee of the public entity within the scope of his employment created the dangerous condition, or the public entity had actual or constructive notice of the dangerous condition under section 835.2, a sufficient time prior to the injury to have taken measures to prevent against this dangerous condition. So what that's saying is, if state property presented a hazard, and that hazard then caused injury, and the public entity had enough time and warning that this hazard was there and it could potentially cause injury, and they failed to act, that they are liable. Now, I have tweeted about this in the past. I'm going to retweet this later because I asked this, I think, 2 years ago. That Governor Newsom, back in 2020, he did this big press conference right in the middle of that huge lightning bust that we had when the entire state was on fire. And he stepped over sacred tribal land and like burned corpses to do this press conference where he signed a pledge that California was going to burn 1 million acres a year in prescribed fire. He was admitting that, yes, the reason why these fires are so bad is because they don't do enough prescribed fire. Prescribed fire, getting rid of fuels, reduces the severity of these fires 100%. And he admitted all that and made a pledge to burn 1 million acres a year. Well, they haven't come close to doing that. They haven't come close to doing that. And in fact, California, they will lie. I shouldn't say lie. They overrepresent the amount of acres that they do. The way that they do it is they count every single process that they do on a parcel as a separate counting of the acres. So let's say they have a plan to burn 100 acres. The planning phase, they count that as 100 acres treated. Then you go out and scout the area. They count it again. Well, there was a process. We treated, right? Then if they go and cut line, right? They cut a little dozer line. That's another process. Now we're up to 300 acres. And then they plumb the line with hose. They count it again. They treated 100 acres with plumb line. And then the day that they actually burn it, another 100 acres. And then sending a patrol in there the next day to make sure that it's out. That's another process on that 100 acres. So on a single 100 acre plot, they will potentially count 700 acres, even up to 1,200 acres on the same plot. So they are overrepresenting the amount of treated acres. That's why when you ask them, how many RX acres have you done? How much prescribed fire have you done? They always say, we've treated 50,000 acres. That's because they didn't actually burn 50,000 acres. They had other processes, including environmental restoration, right? So they may not have done anything as it pertains to fire mitigation. It could have just been some kind of habitat restoration, but technically that gets counted. So they lie about what they do all the time. And so I asked this question, if Governor Newsom promised to do 1 million acres a year, he admitted that the reason why we're having all these fires and people's homes are burning up is because they haven't been doing 1 million acres a year. And then he promises to do that and doesn't do it. Why aren't people suing him? Why aren't people suing him? If he's admitting that the lack of prescribed fire is the reason why the homes are burning, and he's admitting they need to do more, and then he doesn't do it, and he doesn't follow his own guidelines, how is he not liable for all this? And why aren't people suing him? Why aren't people getting mad about this? So as it turns out, in this amazing amended complaint that was just filed today, they're pointing out that it is California law. They are liable. They are liable if they allow a hazardous condition to exist on their property, and that hazardous condition creates an injury. Now, according to this complaint, they believe that the Topanga State Park, which is owned and managed by California State Parks, and that the January 1st Lockman fire and the January 7th, 2025 Palisades fire originated in close proximity to each other near the Temescal Ridge Trail in Topanga State Park, not federal lands, Topanga State Park. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that the California State Parks property in Topanga State Park, you getting it? Plaintiffs are informed to believe that the California State Parks property in Topanga State Park was in a dangerous condition on January 7th. It sure was. And because embers from the Lockman fire, which occurred 6 days earlier on property California State Parks owned and managed, were not extinguished, but allowed to smolder, burn, and reignite during the high wind event on January 7th, California State Parks permitted a dangerous fire condition to exist on its property, which it owns and manages, by allowing embers from the Lockman fire to smolder, burn, and reignite, and California State Parks failed to inspect and maintain its property, and failed to provide proper fire protection on its property to prevent embers from the Lockman fire from smoldering, burning, and reigniting into the Palisades fire, particularly in light of the National Weather Service's forecast of the, quote, particularly dangerous situation. That's that PDS statement that Rich Thompson was warning us about in the days leading up to this fire. It was inevitable. Particularly in light of the NWS's forecast of a particularly dangerous situation that would cause fire starts to rapidly grow in size with extreme fire behavior. They alleged that the dangerous condition on California State Parks property was a change from the natural condition of California State Parks property. The Palisades fire and the associated damage to plaintiffs' properties were due to the changed condition of the California State Parks property and not the natural condition of the property. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that these dangerous conditions caused the injuries to the plaintiffs as alleged herein. Plaintiffs are further informed and believe that the dangerous condition of California State Parks properly created a reasonably foreseeable risk of the kind of injury which was incurred, namely that embers which were allowed to smolder, burn, and reignite from a holdover fire on its property were capable of igniting a wildfire and damaging the plaintiff's property. Plaintiffs are informed and believe that a negligent act or omission by an employee of California State Parks within the scope of his or her employment created the dangerous condition. California State Parks and its employees had actual and constructive knowledge of the dangerous condition in time to have taken measures to protect against it. Specifically, the employees of California State Parks knew or should have known of the particularly dangerous situation and extreme fire conditions forecasted by the NWS days prior to January 7th, 2025, and that any embers not fully extinguished from the Lockman fire could start a dangerous wildfire. California State Parks and its employees did not take measures to ensure that the embers from the Lockman fire were fully extinguished on its property prior to the historic wind event to protect against this dangerous situation. Boom! This to me is the crux of it. You can't argue this part, in my opinion. Let's look at California state property. This is the area where both fires started. Does this look hazardous to you? Does that look hazardous to you? Like guys with wildland experience, firefighters? Would you want to be right in the middle of this when it's on fire? No. Dude, this goes nuclear. Now, what they're saying is that the hazardous situation that was created was their failure to fully extinguish the Lockman fire. And I think that's a good technicality to focus on because it's not the natural state of the park. It was an alteration, right? It wasn't the natural condition of the park. And so this is where, human intervention created a unique situation. But personally, anecdotally, I look at this and I think just the presence of these fuels and the failure to maintain it, especially given that there's brush clearance codes, there's brush clearance mandates here. And this is so hazardous and it's so volatile. The fact that it's not being taken seriously, it drives me crazy. So anyway, tremendous work by Trey. Just absolutely tremendous work. Like I said, it's going to take us some time to get full accountability here, but we're starting to get it. We're starting to get it. There are good people out there. They're not in government, shocker. So big ups to Robertson and Associates for filing this amended complaint on behalf of the victims. This is the lead case. This is the lead case for the Palisades fire, and it's finally moving forward. There's going to be a response. There's going to be a defense. It's going to take a few months, and the LADWP and the state are absolutely entitled to push back on this. And like I said, some of these things like changing the logs, changing the times that they were there, the misunderstanding in statements given to the Washington Post, these could legitimately be misunderstandings. So we need to reserve judgment and let this process play out. But this is unique information, and I think it paints a very nuanced and complicated picture of this fire. And like I said, guys, government And these incompetent agencies, potentially incompetent agencies, they love your conspiracy theories. They love it when you blame it on climate change. They love it when you blame it on space lasers. They love it when you blame it on Dr. Evil or P. Diddy, setting fire to the hillside. They love that because it covers for them. And it covers the fact that most of these issues are just plain old bureaucratic incompetence. Like those emails where on day 2 of the fire, they're like, oh, I'd like to reprioritize getting this reservoir fixed. Are you kidding me? These are the people who are in charge of running things for us and keeping us safe. I mean, I'm curious what you guys think of these people. Are they incompetent? Have you seen enough? Well, this complaint that was filed today by Trey, it shows a high degree of confidence that the Lockman fire was the rekindle. I mean, that's sort of the foundation of their case against the state and the state's liability here. I do believe the state is liable. This fire started on state property, and I think the condition of the fuels there is criminal. They're very confident this was a rekindle, but what was shocking to me was that there were multiple fires. There were multiple ignitions, apparently. So again, LADWP is entitled to the defense, and they could prove some of this stuff wrong. I look forward to seeing their defense. I think it's going to be very interesting. But just keep in mind, guys, that I've said it before, I'll say it again. Everyone in Topanga, you are going to get the Palisades treatment, okay? You are going to get it. Remember this first slide that we looked at? It's been since 78 that the Topanga State Park burned really, really, really hot. You guys are next. You're next. And I look at these properties around Topanga, they do not look good at all. Like, they look horrendous. You guys really need to get your act together. Again, I don't want to be histrionic, but it's just all these fires follow the same pattern. And you are overdue. You are overdue. So it's a very high probability that this year you are going to get wrecked the same way the Palisades got wrecked. If a fire ignites north of Topanga, all of old Topanga is going to become like paradise. And, there's a lot of older folks who live there. They're not going to be able to get out. The roads in the Palisades are actually a lot easier to navigate than the ones in Topanga. So Topanga is a death trap. And you've seen that Governor Newsom's property, the Topanga State Park, is not in good shape. So if there's a fire out there, whether that's from power lines or a bad actor who wants to do a lot of damage on a windy day, you guys, I've seen your neighborhood. You have no chance of surviving, okay? So you need to start clearing these flammable things from around your property and give yourself the best chance that you can possibly have, all right? I hope you guys take it seriously. Thank you so much for joining me. Big ups to Trey. Big ups. Because he filed this complaint today. This is with Foley, Bezek, Bailey, and Curtis, and Robertson and Associates, seeking out justice for the victims of the Palisades fire. There's good people out there, guys. So keep your heads up. Go clear your brush, now.